welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. On tonight's show, we'll be exploring one of the most important relationships a woman will ever have in her lifetime, the mother-daughter relationship. Over history, mother-daughter relationships have provided rich material for TV shows and novels and sitcoms and agonizing advice columns. We might envy mothers and daughters who seem to have great relationships and find those that seem to be toxic to be endlessly fascinating. The significance and impact of the mother-daughter relationship doesn't end when little girls grow up. How to navigate these interactions into adulthood and learning to set healthy boundaries are topics many of us could use a little help with, particularly those of us who might have more difficult relationships. Luckily, we have put together an amazing panel tonight of guests who will provide their wisdom and life experience on these topics and more. First, I am so pleased and honored to welcome our first guest, Roshka Hasseldine. Roshka is one of very few therapists in North America who actually specializes in mother-daughter relationships. She has been working in this field for more than 20 years with thousands of mothers and daughters from all sorts of cultures, backgrounds, and countries. She's the author of 2 books on the subject, The Silent Female Scream and The Mother-Daughter Puzzle. She's also the founder of Mother-Daughter Coaching International, an organization that trains mental health professionals and life coaches on how to work with mothers and daughters more effectively. Roshka has also presented her work at the United Nations Commission for the Status of Women in New York. Welcome to the show, Roshka.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And thank you for doing this topic.
Thank you so much for joining us. And tonight you're actually giving something away. I see you've brought some books on the table here. Tell us a little bit about the books that you're giving away tonight to our viewers.
I'm giving 4 copies of my books, 2 copies of The Silent Female Scream and 2 copies of The Mother-Daughter Puzzle away. So, yeah, these books, the Mother-Daughter Puzzle came out, I think, a year and a half ago. Silent Female Scream took a bit longer, took a long time to write, and that came out about 7, 8, maybe 9 years ago.
But obviously the material is evergreen and still relevant.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving those away. So if you wanted a chance to win those, make sure to visit the Facebook page for Rogers TV Ottawa, comment and like the link for this show. We'll do a draw at the end of the week, and if we do choose your name, all you have to do is come to the studio to pick up your copies right here at 475 Richmond Road. Next, I'd like to welcome our guest, Yvette Goodland. Yvette is a clinical social worker and the owner of Stepping Stone e-Counseling. She has more than 17 years of experience on this topic, and she was recently featured in the pages of People magazine for her heartwarming story of adopting her daughter as a single mom from Nunavut. Yvette is a proud mother whose daughter has been in her life since the day she was born. Welcome to the show, Yvette.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great.
Later in the show, we will be joined on the phone by Natalie Martin, who is the president of Fem City Ottawa. She'll be sharing her story with us, so make sure you stick around for that. And as always, our guests are excited to hear from you and happy to answer any questions you might have. Please call us at 613-728-1001, or if you're watching us on Facebook Live right now, please feel free to comment with your questions underneath, and we'll try to get to them before the end of the show. Roshka, let's start with you. Why did you decide to pursue this field of work?
Well, it's actually many years ago when I was a teenager. My relationship with my mother was not good at all, and progressively getting worse. I actually brought a photo.
Let's do a little bit of show and tell.
Yeah,
So
that's me with my mum when I was a teenager, and then I'll show you the next photo. This is my daughter. That's a young photo of her. She's 30 now.
Okay.
So I was 26 years old when she was born.
Yeah.
So, and she's now 30. So it's a wee while ago. And when the first thought I had when she was born, and I write about that in The Silent Female Scream, was I have to understand why my mother and I are not getting on, and why my mother struggles with my independence or can't listen to what I'm saying, because if I didn't, the dynamics that was not going well between my mother and I would be repeating those with Olivia. So I knew that I needed to either fix it or to absolutely understand it, so that I didn't repeat the same dynamics with her, and that she and her would have a better relationship together.
And I want to hear more about the self-work that it took to come to those realizations. But first of it, I want to hear a little bit more about what made you decide to pursue your career in social work, and what are some of the themes that you see popping up in your practice when it comes to mother-daughter relationships?
I think as a social worker, we have a really unique perspective in terms of treatment for involving ourselves in families' lives, because our training is very much systems focused, and we look at the family as a whole, not to say that other practices don't, but that's really the root of social work. Over the years, my whole career, I've been immersed in relationships from families, and that's where it stems from. I myself, I adopted my daughter as a single parent. The dynamic between the two of us, always kind of strikes me as interesting, mainly because of my social work background. But, beyond that, as a mom, when I look at the two of us and the amount of time we spend together, because I think when it's just two people, myself, my daughter.
Because you're far from your family. You're originally from Newfoundland, right?
Yes, yeah. So, we're this tiny little package, but we spend a lot of time together. And so I'm often conscious of, the worry in me kind of evolves around, like, is there a codependency there that, can be risky? so I try, like, I'm very mindful of that when I am interacting with my daughter, and, I want her to be the best adult she can be, so that means teaching her the skills that she needs to be a good adult.
What does it mean to you, Yvette, to be a good mother?
The decisions that I always make are usually, rooted in how does this impact her as an adult. I treat her and parent her according to her age, obviously, but, my goal for her, my hope for her is that she just turns out to be a good, decent person, So, and, not all of that comes naturally. There's a part of life that's learned. It's not a natural tendency, I think, for some people. So I just, my hope for her is that she appreciates, the world that we live in, and that she just grows up to be a good person.
Looking back, Rushka, on your relationship with your mother, what are some of the things that sort of pop out the most for you? What are some themes that were ongoing?
I think in terms of my family, and also what I see with my clients, is the themes of women having learned to sacrifice themselves, to neglect themselves, and this selflessness.
Yes.
And I think it relates to what you were saying about what does it mean to be a good mom. It actually means being a person first. And that's, I think, one of the things that my clients have taught me. Is that
a modern interpretation? To put yourself first for self-care? Like, is that something we're just now starting to talk about?
I think in terms of mothers and daughters, and yes, we are. And I think it's also related to our patriarchal society, where women's needs are put last. Because we are supposed to be the caring gender. I call that in the mother-daughter puzzle the culture of female service, where women are supposed to give of themselves, but what do mothers need so that they can be the best mother, so that they are also seen as a person. Because the person that the daughter is relating to is not just you as a mum, but also you as a woman and you as a person. And I think that I see that so much with my clients, because most of my clients are daughters in their 20s, 30s and 40s wanting their mum in for couples therapy.
Interesting. So it's the daughters who are more self-aware that there's a problem.
I think they're both aware, but the daughter wants actually the mum on board in terms of changing some of the dynamics in the family. And the most common dynamic is this selflessness. It is actually quite disastrous, I think, for women's empowerment. It's disastrous because women who put themselves last, In the workplace, how are you going to get ahead?
What did that look like in your family or for your mom?
I think for my mum, it was how it came out, and how it commonly also comes out is the emotional manipulation. So therefore, because the dynamic underneath this is that if a mum doesn't know what she needs, it's usually the daughter then, the next carer in the female carer in the family, that's then supposed to meet mum's needs, or mum's unvoiced needs, mum's unmet needs, and usually it's the eldest daughter. So I'm the eldest. So a lot of my clients usually are eldest daughters.
Interesting.
Because that's who it lands on.
So give me an example of what that might look like.
I think often, well, for example, mum was, the daughter would say, "Are you all right, mum?" Because mum's behaving, in a bristly, tense.
Yeah.
No, I'm fine. So not knowing how to say, no, actually, this is what I feel.
And this is what I need.
And this is what I need. Because that language, they don't know how to say that language. They haven't been taught it. Our mothers, my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, were just not taught that language. And I think women today are waking up to the fact that that language has been missing within our society. And like you said, it's the whole family. Yeah.
Just an interesting point that you're making, when you extend it to this current generation of moms, recognizing that it's important for their daughters to see that they're human. And so I'm very conscious of that when I'm parenting, but I have to say it's a very unnatural part, because we are conditioned on some level to give. So when I look at my daughter and say, no, I can't give, I have things to do, which an example is coming here tonight. Yeah. My daughter was trying to manipulate me and say, I don't want you to go. I want you to stay here with me. I'm going to feel lonely. And I'm saying, no, this is good for mom. Mommy has to go. But my insides were like, the message was like, oh my God, this is killing me.
Yeah, I'm going to neglect her.
Right, right. She's going to end up in therapy.
Yeah, no.
But this is where, this is kind of what it means to now have to switch it up and parenting now, and what it looks like and how you put yourself first.
We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, I want to talk more about some strategies that people in mother-daughter relationships can use to navigate boundaries and difficult situations. So when we come back after the break, we'll talk about this and lots more. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We're talking about how to have a healthy mother-daughter relationship with special guests Rashka Hasseldine and Yvette Goodland joining us in the studio tonight. Now, before we went to break, you were talking a little bit about the different generations, the family of origin, the importance of looking at the bigger picture, Rashka, when it comes to the mother-daughter relationship and how it should not be separated from relationships with other family members. Can you maybe speak a little bit to your own self-exploration?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a huge myth out there that in order to understand what happens between, say, my mother and I, or my daughter and I, or any mother-daughter relationship, is that it's separate from any other relationship, or separate from the family, or separate from how society treats women, and that's absolutely not true. You're not going to find out what's going on between, well, I didn't find out what went on between my mother and I, and certainly my clients won't, if we don't look at the bigger picture.
Where did you find your clues in your case, in your story?
In my story, I think, well, certainly in terms of my mother, so I was born in New Zealand, and both my parents were Dutch, and so my mother, though, was born in Indonesia, and because Indonesia was a Dutch colony, and she also, because of that, spent 2 years in a Japanese concentration camp with my grandmother. And so that, in part, the trauma of that certainly impacted who my mother is. But that's not the only thing. I think in my family, my grandmother would say things like, oh, this is a woman's lot in life. She had this absolute belief, because of the sexism in her society and what she'd been taught as a woman, is that she had no power. And I think my mother also inherited that belief that women have to just put up with what they're given. They've got put up with, you know, the roles that they're expected to play.
Just suck it up, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and be the caregiver and put themselves last. I think if I asked my mother who she was as a person, she would have absolutely no idea how to answer that question, because she didn't know who she was. She was the mother, the daughter, the wife.
And how did that impact you, in terms of the daughter and how you felt about yourself?
Well, I realised I inherited the same thing, and I realised that I needed to find out who I was, so that so I could give Olivia the freedom to be her, and she didn't have to be this daughter role who took care of mum. I call it the river of nurturing flowing backwards, where daughters take care of mum because mum doesn't know how to take care of herself. It's being an emotional helpmate. And my mother did the same with her mother, my grandmother did it with my great-grandmother. And so I had to really learn, what do I need? How do I feel? What do I think? Who am I? So that Olivia could do the same. Who is she? What do I think? What do I need? What do I feel?
I want to hear more about that in a minute, but we have a caller on the line. Rodney, are you with us?
Are you there?
Thank you so much for watching and for calling in. Did you have a question for our guests?
I do. My question is, as a father and a husband, what should I do to facilitate a better relationship between my wife and my...
Between your wife and your daughter? I'm sorry, you just cut out there.
Yes, between my wife and my daughter.
What do you think?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Could you repeat the question, please?
I didn't quite hear it.
Yes, sorry. As a father, what could I do to facilitate a better relationship between my wife and my daughter?
Well, if I can be perfectly blunt, I would listen to your wife, actually. It's because your daughter is watching how you treat your wife and how husbands treat or partners treat their wives. So if when women are listened to, emotionally supported, that makes a huge difference for the daughter, because the daughter doesn't need to do it for mum if that dynamic is there, but also she's then learning that women's voices matter. So, because when women's voices don't matter, mothers and daughters end up fighting. So when women are not heard, mothers and daughters fight over who gets to be heard. When women are not emotionally supported in the family, mothers and daughters fight over who gets, because it's an either or dynamic. It's not it's not both, it's one or the other. So by creating families where women are heard and emotionally supported, mothers and daughters are not set up to fight over the basic human need of being heard and emotionally supported.
Yvette, what do you think?
I think it's interesting. You bring up a really good point in that this father's role, I assume you're a father, in this dynamic is truly about being a role model or breaking a stereotype of what it means to be a man, engaging in healthy conversations with your partner, showing your child how to negotiate back and forth and be respectful of each other, showing that you are listening to your wife, showing that you're listening to your child when your wife's around, so that she feels secure about that relationship. I think it's about fostering what you have in front of you and being a really good role model. If switching it up a little.
There's another dynamic too. So being father's little girl. So if fathers invest a lot of time in their daughters and they listen to their daughter and they emotionally support the daughter, but not so much the wife or the mother, that is absolutely disastrous for mums and daughters, because then, in a sense, mom can see the daughter's getting the attention that she actually needs from.
It creates a rivalry, a jealousy.
Absolutely, yeah. So
thank you so much for calling in, Rodney. Yvette, tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are being an adoptive mom versus a biological mom. What do you think are some of the differences, if any?
In the first couple of years of my daughter's life, I was very preoccupied with the dynamic of not being biological. And so, for me, I put a lot of emotional energy into ensuring that she remains feeling connected to her biological roots. So that means for me, she's from Nunavut. I make a lot of effort to keep her connected to the Inuit population here in Ottawa. But that's kind of shifting a little bit. It feels a little bit more like, for lack of a better word, a biological relationship. I don't know how to explain it, but it just feels a little bit more natural. I see less about the adoption now than I used to in the past. I don't see her as an adopted daughter anymore, I guess. But
she's your daughter.
Yeah, right. Like you know, so it's kind of interesting that way. In terms of the mother-daughter piece, I don't know if it's because of the single parenting piece or the adoption piece, but. And I think I mentioned this in the People article, there's just this closeness there that I don't know. Maybe I'm just dreaming it up because I want to believe that it's super special, but it feels a bit different. And I've had friends comment on, the closeness that they see between me and my daughter, which, ultimately could be a product, I guess, of the fact that we just spend so much time together and we've had to figure it out, and that part feels special to me, but I know that I need to be careful because I think, like I mentioned it before, I think a codependency can form in there, and that could just make it crumble.
And I want to talk a little bit more about what codependency is, but first we have a caller on the line. Julie, are you there?
Hi. Welcome back. We missed you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for watching. Did you have a question for us tonight?
I do, actually. So me and my daughter, she's 12, and we are like the best of friends. But when it comes to like respecting me as a mother, I don't feel that she does that. She respects me as a friend and disrespects me like a friend too. So I don't know how to really handle the situation. I don't know.
Sounds like a case of boundary setting. What do you think?
Well, she's 12, and 12 is that starting point where girls learn to have their own voice. Carol Gilligan is one of the main women's development theorists. She did a huge amount of research, and she calls it when girls hit the wall at about 12. Meaning that society's expectations of being nice and being silent hits them. And I think that certainly impacts a lot of teenage, can explain a lot of issues between mums and teenage daughters. But yeah, boundaries.
Are there some steps that Julie can take with her daughter?
Are important. I think, again, speak in terms of this is how I feel, this is what I need, this is what I think. In terms of, you are the mum. So therefore you're the one making the decisions. And she's only 12, so therefore she cannot, there are only certain decisions that she can make that are age appropriate. But
so
also,
is there a simple exercise she can maybe try to kind of get her daughter used to seeing her as more of an authority figure?
I don't think there's actually a simple exercise. I think it is about actually talking and communication, and talking about being honest about what you're feeling in that moment, what you're thinking, and what you need from each other in those moments.
I know. One thing that I often talk to clients about when it comes to boundary setting is the way you communicate the boundary. So like, it's one thing to be putting a boundary in place, but you actually have to feel good about the boundary, because like a lot of people associate boundary with a negative connotation. So in actual fact, it's not. And that's another piece about women, right? So like, we need to start
yourself
looking,
without feeling guilty.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we need to start putting a boundary in place and feeling good about it. And that means as a mother as well. So even with my daughter at 8, if she's, trying to dig her heels in about something, and I strongly feel that I'm a mom, so, and I communicate it very clearly, very concisely, with a little discussion. And that doesn't mean that I'm like, dictating. This is an age and a time and a decision that comes down to me. I'm the expert in this right now.
Exactly.
And I communicate that. But part of the communication style, what I always talk to clients about that's very powerful, is using I language. So like instead of kind of approaching a conversation with you this, you that, you did this, you didn't say that, it's more about I feel like this is what's happening when you say this is how I feel. So what's happening there, it's hard for a person's back to get up when they're feeling that the conversation is being directed at yourself.
You're honouring that language, you're honouring yourself and you're honouring what your daughter feels.
We're just about to go to break. Thank you so much for calling in, Julie. When we come back, we'll be joined by Natalie Martin, who is the president of Femme City Ottawa. She'll be sharing her story as a mother and as a daughter with us. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break with Natalie's story. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and we're in the studio tonight talking about how to have a healthy mother-daughter relationship. We are joined in the studio by special guests, Roshka Hasseldine and Yvette Goodland, and we are just now newly joined on the phone by our third guest of the evening, Natalie Martin. Natalie is the president of Femme City Ottawa, which is a wonderful local organization that empowers local business women. And it's a great networking organization as well. Natalie, are you on the phone? Are you on the line with us?
I am. Hi, Barbara.
Hi. Thank you so
me?
much. Yes, I can hear you just fine. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Natalie, you do a lot of great work for women in Ottawa. You're the leader of an organization that is fundamental. A fundamental believer in supporting and empowering women, but you didn't always feel supported as a woman yourself. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, the relationships with the women in your life and some of the patterns that have evolved and how that sort of translated into the relationship that you have with your daughter today.
Yes. Well, thanks so much. I think this is such an important topic, and I've been watching for the first half hour, and everything your guests are talking about is resonating with me. Certainly growing up, I do want to mention that, mental health and mental illness, I think, was a big, elephant in the room in my family and certainly with my mother. And so that created a very difficult relationship growing up. The disconnect emotionally, the lack of support. A lot of that stemmed from, perhaps her state of mind. So going into, my adolescence, young adulthood, it certainly, created a foundation of mistrust and not really having, that support around me that I was looking for, especially in my mother role, in a mother. So that's, a little bit of the past and, talking about, the current relationship with my mother now, it's really been, decades in working towards setting very clear boundaries.
What are some of the boundaries that you had to set?
Well, it became very evident, as I became a mother myself at a young age in my 20s, that I was very clear in my intention of not repeating the patterns, that I was faced with my own mother. So certainly the boundary of, okay, she would have her own opinion about either myself or my choices. And I just really had to set that boundary of what I could take in and what I needed to leave out of my life. And I had to distance myself from, a little bit of that emotional, abuse is probably a very strong word, but there was a little bit of that manipulation that was happening emotionally, between my mother and I, that I knew that I didn't want to repeat with my own daughter.
What do you mean by manipulation?
It starts with any type of choice that I would have made in the past as a young adult. There was very lack of support. There was criticism. There was negativity. And then when I learned, as I went through my own, self-reflection about what I wanted in my life, I realized a lot of what my mother, speaking about my mother, was going through or saying to me was a reflection of herself, was probably a reflection of her own insecurities, and that it really had nothing to do with me. So that took, a lot of work for myself, to create that foundation for myself. And then the boundary that I set with my mother, I would say wasn't made out of anger towards her. It was made out of self-respect for myself, So that was kind of how I started creating that boundary.
Yeah.
Which, if I can just mention, it kind of speaks to our discussion around a boundary isn't a bad word. I think it's a very healthy way for self-care. But I think because, women have been,
not allowed to have boundaries.
Right? Exactly.
For generations.
Right?
Yeah.
So now when people do see boundaries put in place, I think they could potentially put a very negative spin on it.
Yeah.
When in actual fact, one of the healthiest things you can do is have some really clear understanding of what you're prepared to tolerate or what you're prepared to invest your energy and time and love in.
But motherhood is kind of a tricky thing, isn't it? Because it's there's such a sanctity of motherhood. There's so many taboos around it, right? I mean, what do you think, Rushka? I mean, it sounds like a lot of Natalie's journey, you could really, really empathize with.
I can completely empathize with everything that she said, actually. Yeah. And in terms of, for me, it's because my mother too was incredibly emotionally manipulative, very, exactly what Natalie said. You make a decision, and then so mum criticises it, tries to stop you even. And I think for me, I needed to understand why my mother was like that, because my mother couldn't support me because she didn't get the support that she needed. And I think, so there's two things that interplay here. Firstly, the lack of support that the women in my family get, and that is actually across many, many countries and cultures, that is absolutely the case. I mean, women women weren't allowed to set boundaries. They weren't, didn't get the opportunities that they needed, that they wanted to have. And I think for me, I became the uncomfortable mirror for my mother. I got to have some of the opportunities that she wasn't allowed to have in her generation. And so therefore, and because she couldn't deal with that and didn't know how to language that, we then criticize it rather than support, because the word support she didn't know how to do.
Natalie, it sounds like this is resonating with you as well.
It is, and like I said, those boundaries for me started being very clearly defined as I became a mother myself. And like I said, I created those boundaries and defined those boundaries not out of anger or out of thinking about the past, but it was really about what is it that I need for myself and how can I have a healthy relationship for myself first, and thinking about myself first. And I think the panelists have also talked about we often think about ourselves last, and certainly I think when we think about ourselves first, regardless of the situation we're in as mothers, we feel guilty. So, there's all these layers that can be very difficult to navigate. But certainly the excuse of, well, she's your mother, you have to accept that behavior no matter what because she's your mother and you must love her no matter what. I don't actually believe that. Yes, I respect and love her, but I have my boundaries set on what I can accept as behavior. So that's very... that's quite clearly defined for myself. And now that my daughter's 26, that relationship with my daughter, I think, that pattern has ended. I was very clear for myself on how I wanted to raise my daughter, what were some of the, fundamental principles that I wanted in my relationship with her. And some of those principles were, one of them was, I want to make sure that my daughter can come to me no matter what, and that she feels safe. I want her to feel safe with me in any type of conversation. And certainly, you want to, talking a little bit about Fem City and women empowerment, well, I mean, it starts from home. I want to feel that my daughter's empowered. I want to give her the tools to feel empowered. So for me to be able to do that with women in business or within my network, I have to be able to first do that with my own daughter. So I think that, there's a lot involved in that.
Yeah.
But a lot of it comes from, either the negative relationship that I had with my mother, I turned it into a positive.
Yeah, I think what Natalie said is really important, because that's what I say to my clients. The same rules apply. There's this expectation that daughters are supposed to put up with anything, like mothers are supposed to put up with anything.
Well, there's daughter guilt, just like there's mother guilt, right?
Absolutely, and no, daughters should not, like mothers, should not put up with anything. If you shouldn't put up with something from someone else, you shouldn't put up with it as a mother or as a daughter. So the same rules apply. Otherwise, we are not going to be healthy human beings. We're not going to have healthy relationships. So,
Natalie, let's pull up some photos of you and your daughter, Natalie, while we're chatting on the phone here.
Sure.
What's your relationship? What's the relationship like between your mom and your daughter? What is your mom like as a grandmother?
Well, it's interesting because it's actually a very positive relationship. She's been a very involved grandparent. Certainly there's times where, she would say certain things to my children in a way that I was like, no, you can't be saying that to my kids. I would hear echoes of my own childhood.
Yes.
But overall, it's a more positive relationship. She's quite supportive, of both my children. I have a 22-year-old son. So she's very supportive as a grandparent. So I've seen, that evolution. And I certainly have never, intervened in ensuring that my children have a positive relationship with their grandmother. I didn't want to, put my own problems or my own issues. I didn't want to impede their relationship with her. It was really important for me to try to separate the two relationships. So they understand. I think that their grandmother, has her own demons, and she has her own issues that she has had to deal with. I mean, some of it is generational, some of it is cultural, but overall, I'm happy to see that there is a good relationship between my children and my mother.
And what about your relationship with your son? Do you feel like that your relationship with your mom has had any impact on it?
Well, with my son, I think, my son is surrounded by two very strong women between his sister and myself. I think that he certainly understands, the female psyche. I think now being a young man himself and, having had, relationships himself, I think, again, my relationship with my son is also quite positive. We also talk about everything. The sibling relationship is also very strong between my son and my daughter. So I think, that foundation started a long time ago, and it was something that, for me, I really try to work hard. Certainly not perfect. We've certainly gone through, what normal families go through.
Yeah.
But I think if you can create a foundation where your children feel safe in the home, I think it really helps them to develop as young adults. And certainly I wanted them to feel, that they could trust. So
it's
I
very
think
important.
That's where.
Yeah, it sounds like you've done a lot of self-work, Natalie. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio tonight. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. When we come back after the break for our last segment of the show, we'll be talking about some of the patterns to watch out for and some of the strategies that you can implement in your own relationship. We'll be right back after the break with Rashka Hasseldine and Yvette Goodland. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and we are talking about how to have a healthy mother-daughter relationship. Rashka, there's an exercise that you conduct with your clients. It's in one of your books that you're giving away tonight. Tell us a little bit about that. It's sort of a mapping tool.
Yes, it's mother-daughter history mapping. It's an exercise I've created where you look at 3 generations of women in your family: you, the daughter, your mum, and your grandma, and it guides you on how to tell the stories of not only what happened in your life, your mother's life, and your grandmother's life, but more importantly, women's multi-generational experience with sexism and patriarchy, and how were women heard in your family, and most often they weren't, and were women emotionally supported in your family or not, and how did that impact your mother's life, your grandmother's life. Also looking at careers. Was your mother and your grandmother able to fulfill the goals and the dreams that they had as teenagers or not? And often women weren't. And how did that impact them emotionally? And when you start peeling away the layers and really understanding what women's emotional reality is like your mother's, your grandmother's, your own, you see then the patterns of what's been passed down, the thoughts, the disempowerment, the expectations to fit into limiting gender roles.
So once you see all these limitations and understand why it is that they behave the way they do, is the idea that you then develop more compassion. Like, what do you do with this information? How do you apply it to your own life experience and to your own needs as a person?
Exactly. Compassion is a good word. It's what I call seeing mum with soft eyes.
Yeah.
But then at the end, the end of the exercise, you draw up a roadmap for change. Okay. So then you start working on, so if there's a theme in your family where women do not know what they need for themselves and do not know how to emotionally feed themselves, then you start working on that. So you literally, I get clients to draw their map and then write 5 steps that they have to do in terms of their roadmap for change. So it's actually creating generational change, this does. And they put it on their fridge and it stays there until they can tick off
those check boxes.
Yeah.
We have a caller on the line. Cynthia, are you with us?
Yes, I am here.
Hi, thank you so much for calling in. Did you have a question for our guests?
Yes, I do. My question is, I grew up with a mother who was an addict. She was an alcoholic. And though I love her very much, over the years I had to learn many, good boundaries in order to put in place in order to have any kind of relationship with her. My question is, now that we are much older and I desire to continue having a relationship with her, to have a deeper relationship with her, but she's really incapable, what kind of tips could you suggest to maybe deepen a relationship but still have boundaries in place for my mental health?
Yvette, what do you think?
I think when you're working with a person whose ability to make change or invest is limited or maybe doesn't even exist, the work turns into more about you and what you want to do for yourself and what you would deem important to achieve with this relationship. So whether it means engaging in conversations with them that you understand where their limits are because of their limited understanding of themselves or the addiction, what have you, but it's about you looking for what you want out of a conversation or what you want. If you can meet those little goals, to me that's success. So even if her behavior doesn't change, how you respond to it is what's important here. So if you can walk away from an interaction with this loved one feeling good about it or feeling like at the very least you're present with the person, just that physical presence alone can have a lot of meaning. And if you're able to walk away feeling good about that, then that's success.
Yeah. I also think it's accepting the mum you have, grieving that you're not going to get the mum that you want or deserve. And when you do that, you're more able to be with the mum that you do have.
So is there an element of forgive and forget in there?
I think it's more understanding. I don't like using the word forgive because I think it's very, very loaded and tainted. It's more about it is a grief process. It's an understanding and an acceptance. It's more an acceptance of
Oprah Winfrey has this definition of forgiveness as letting go of the hope that things could have been any different.
And yes, I would agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. But in some cases, and we were talking about this earlier during the break, that sometimes it's not possible to fix a relationship. Sometimes you have to walk away, even in a relationship as fundamental as a mother-daughter, and that was your experience, wasn't it?
Absolutely my experience. I mean, my mother did make it easier because she refused to speak to me as well. So it certainly was easier. But yeah, my mother absolutely it was my way or the highway with her. I was either going to be her emotional helpmate, i.e. which is live next door to her, listen to her endless stories. It was that extreme, or I was on my own, and that's the choice I had to make. And I needed to walk away in order to save myself and to save my kids. Actually,
It becomes about self-preservation.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cynthia, does that answer your question?
Wow, that hit the nail on the head for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night. I want to talk a little bit about the Me Too movement and the Believe Her movement, and what kind of role do you see that playing in the mother-daughter relationship of today?
I actually think the mother-daughter relationship is central to that movement, because if you think about it, if the horrible statistics, especially in America, England, and New Zealand, I'm not sure. I mean, what it exactly is here in Canada, but every second or third or fourth woman has experienced some form of sexual assault or some sort of violence. That must impact the mother-daughter relationship. And also the question, why has it taken so long for that reality of women to finally be spoken about? So the silencing of women's experience, the mother-daughter relationship is right there, because in a sense we either collude with it or we speak up. So mothers and daughters are right there in terms of speaking up about what it's like to be women in our society, what's expected, what we are expected to keep quiet, what we experience.
But I also got to wonder, I think we're in a generation now where, our age group speaking up, sharing our stories, when the older generations still carry a lot of shame or self-blame, there's potential for a wedge, I think, just when you've got two completely different schools of thought, So, I think we're on a cusp of something where the next generation, that wedge is probably not going to be so significant. We're going to have a better understanding of the dynamics that are happening in abusive relationships. There's going to be more acceptance, more appreciation for why it takes so long for a woman to leave, for example, whereas the older generation, right? Not all older, that's not what I mean, but I think...
You're right, there was more of a silencing, but the thing is, things can continue in silence.
Yes.
And that's the problem, is in understanding, even if mum isn't willing to talk about...
Agreed, I completely agree.
We do need to know that story, because if you don't know it, what you don't know will repeat itself.
Well, Natalie mentioned earlier the elephant in the room being mental illness. And there are other elephants in the room, like sexual violence, and, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and things like that. So there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement, I guess, for healing to take place, right?
Yes.
So I just want to correct myself. I didn't want to make it sound like you don't bring these things to the table. It just means I think we're kind of at that generation where the black and white is really clear. Like, hopefully for future generations it gets a little bit more gray and there's more tolerance and more understanding.
I don't think you said, I didn't hear it at all like that.
Good.
What I'm hearing is that the change that's happening in society, where women are starting to speak, and it is happening with the 20s, 30s, with the younger women, because our mothers and our grandmothers were so taught to be, and to take the toxic blame that somehow they caused it, they were to blame, rather than, so that's generational change that's happening right there.
Yeah, right in front of us.
Yeah, which is brilliant.
Yvette, what made you take the huge decision to not only adopt a child, not only adopt as a single parent, but also adopt a child that doesn't look like you?
Some of it was kind of circumstantial. I worked in the Indigenous community as a social worker and made some really great friendships with people from Nunavut. And, as a single person, I kind of floated around the idea of adopting. And I had friends from Nunavut kind of approach me and say, is this something that interests you? I know of a young woman, who's thinking about this. So it kind of happened that way. I never really thought of it as, a cult, difference in skin color or anything like that. Yeah, it was more about, finding somebody that I thought would be, hopefully she or he would be a good fit. I would be good for them. And I have to say, we are a perfect fit. Like, it just blows my mind how
Isn't it amazing how that happens?
Really, like,
Yeah.
I'm in awe over it at times when I look at how good we are together.
Like,
You know,
You chose each other.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
Yeah.
It was
Perfect way of
quite,
putting
yeah,
it.
it was really, really quite special. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our show, but I wanted to ask you, Rashka, where can we find you? You sometimes from time to time put on workshops or make yourself available to work with other professionals in your field.
Yes, I do a lot of training for other mental health professionals and coaches on how to specialise, because I want to develop a place like that's on motherdaughtercoach.com. Find a coach. That's where the graduates of my training program are listed, so that people, wherever they are, can get the help that they need, because there is a major training gap out there. So
I'm really glad we were able to find you for the show.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And Yvette, where can we find you? Do you ever
I just recently started my own private practice, so this is a huge career shift for me. Not necessarily this type of work, but I've left. I worked at the Royal for many years, and just decided to do this.
in part to have a better relationship with your daughter, right?
Absolutely. I just found the impact that world was having on me was not worth what I was losing.
And so we can find you online on your website?
steppingstonesecounseling.ca.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies, for joining us tonight. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the studio again next week. Have a great evening.